Bryce, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
I appreciate the opportunity, Chris.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. I started a company called TCE Strategy back in 2016, which stands for Technology and Cybersecurity Education. And we try to keep our clients one step ahead of real world cybercriminal risks so that they do not end up in the headlines in a negative way about something bad that happened to their company because of cybercriminals.
That's really concise.
Of course, there's a lot more to it than that. There is a bit of a backstory here. So, my degree's in chemistry. I thought I was going to be a PhD chemist. 2 years of grad school cured me of that notion. Had always been in technology for fun. I used to sell computers at Best Buy. I hacked into my high school's computer system. I don't even know if you call it a network at that point, but I remember when I finally got in, all of us students had blue screen backgrounds and the teachers had red screen. And when I guessed the computer teacher's password and my screen turned red, I thought I'm getting expelled. I think I was able to log out in time, which is good, but that's a separate story. Got into technology after dropping out of grad school and found a liking to it. I ended up in the payroll space, which is ripe with cybersecurity
Yeah.
concerns. You think about what payroll does, it takes a big pot of a company's money and moves it into a bunch of little pots. Your employees, your taxes, their 401k, their healthcare savings, on and on and on. What a wonderful place for a cyber criminal to hide. Find one of our clients that more than 1,000 employees, make up a janitor, see if anyone notices. Wait till one of our law firms runs their quarterly bonus run for $8 gazillion, change all the ACH numbers to your bank account and never be seen from again. These were not hypothetical issues we were dealing with back in 2001. So from '01 to '04, I pushed a lot more cybersecurity with the small company I was with. And then we got bought by Wells Fargo. And we got big. We got really big, really fast. And I thought I was working myself out of a job, but in '07, they named me CIO of the line of business. So sometimes things work out. Um, Wells was very, very strict when it came to cybersecurity. I mean, they were
Hmm.
a bank and they had ATMs in the '80s when people were, hopping up telephone poles and putting on butt sets and figuring out how to talk to the ATM to release money. I mean, they had a long history at this, but they wanted us regulated one step down from a nuclear missile silo, and that wasn't compatible with the payroll space at the time. They wanted every client to have multi-factor authentication regardless of size. A great idea, but in the mid 2000s, completely incompatible with what customers would accept.
Yeah.
So from '04 to 2012, I ended up pushing back on corporate probably 75% of the time when they wanted cybersecurity this or that, saying it doesn't make sense for our scenario and here's why. And the other 25% of the time, Mama Wells had a good point, and I needed to convince the CEO of my line of business that we needed to do this and find the money. What an amazing stomping ground, an amazing
Yeah.
training area to later on start my own cybersecurity company. And the reason I did it is because I was at Target in 2013 and 2014 when we lost 40 million credit cards.
Oh,
And I was not in cybersecurity at the time. I was running the technology programs that would touch the stores themselves, things that would change the team member experience and the customer experience. Some things were mundane, new, scales in the deli, new Wi-Fi systems. But some things were front and center to the future of retail, like buy online at Target.com, pick up in a store. How do you do that? How do you integrate the systems to make all that work? Well, one of my teams was running that, and it was fascinating and it
yeah.
was great. And we launched it on Black Thursday 2013. And it was successful and it was exciting and it worked. And at the same time, cyber criminals that penetrated the point of sale system, likely before I ever started, flipped a switch and began exfiltrating credit cards millions per day out of our system. And we didn't know. Well, when the FBI and the Secret Service came knocking on the door, then we knew. A couple days after that, when Brian Krebs blew up the story of the world, then everybody knew.
Yeah.
I had a chance to meet him at a conference several years ago. We were both speaking at, and he talked about how he toiled in obscurity as a journalist until he broke the Target story, and then his world exploded.
Yeah.
Yeah, funny, mine too, Chris. I could relate to that very directly about worlds exploding. So my family went from bonus checks to unemployment checks, and it was a life-changing experience, Chris. What happened is when something like that hits you and you didn't expect it coming, you batten down the hatches
Yeah.
and you eliminate all financial spend that you can. You see how long a runway you have. Mine was not huge, and you ask for assistance. And I'm grateful to say the government has a lot of it.
Yeah.
Um, We don't, it's hard to talk about, but I think it's important for people to understand that cybersecurity is real. It doesn't exist in an ivory tower. We live in a patriarchal society, so men are supposed to take care of themselves. But in Minnesota, we have what most people call food stamps, or it's called WIC, women, infant, and children, because men don't need that kind of help, right? But my wife and my 2 year old, and she was pregnant with number three at the time, they all qualified. So three of us did. But in order to get on food stamps, it's run by the Department of Agriculture, if you can believe that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and what they do is they want to prove the efficacy of their program. So if you're under five or are a pregnant or nursing mother, then they want to do blood draws to look at your hemoglobin rate and what have you, and to prove that nourishing young children with healthy food leads them to have much more productive lives and be better members of society, which I
Yeah.
fully believe in. But my kids were perfectly healthy. I was simply unemployed. Well, what the Department of Agriculture demands you do is to take blood draws.
Yeah.
And for my wife, that's inconvenient, but she's a grown woman. But when you do that with a 2 year old and you see them pull blood out of their body because daddy doesn't have a job, it changes you. It changes you. And I was angry. I was upset and I was hurt. And I decided to do something about it. I wanted to help other people not fall victim to what my family had because some cyber criminal halfway around the world thought they could make a quick buck.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started the company. We do a lot of things. We do incident response, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some of that because that's exciting. But we do general cybersecurity assessments from the public sector to the private. Recently did a water district down in Florida, and I can't say which one, but it was interesting. We do internal and external penetration tests. We do fractional chief information security officer services. Essentially, like if your company had a part-time accountant or
Yeah.
attorney, well, we do that, but as head of cybersecurity. We do vulnerability scans, both internal and external. We do incident response, and I do some professional speaking on behalf of the company at conferences all around the world.
Fun. How
It is
long?
a good time.
How long have you been doing this public speaking?
Started in 2011. Wells was actually pretty open to it. They had to be very careful with what I
Yeah.
was allowed to and not to say, so I had to go through a lot of layers. But they would let me do it, which I appreciated. I went to Target. Now, Target was a great company to work for. I have nothing bad to say about them, but they have a $1 billion marketing budget. And
Yeah.
I tell you, when I asked could I public speak, it was like talking to the hand. It was like, sit down, computer boy. This isn't what you do. So that was the end of that. But then in 2014, after that ended, I picked it up in more earnest. And now a member of the National Speakers Association, and have spoken in 35 or 40 U.S. states and Greece and China and Tokyo. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. So I want to ask you the question that I prepared you for, and I ask a lot of my other guests, particularly those in the cyberspace and the counter fraud and counter scam space. Have you ever been a victim of a cybersecurity incident, scam, fraud personally?
Yes and no. Indirectly, of course, I was from Target, but that isn't
Hmm.
personal. What I will say is this. I had So a number of my clients have either me or someone on my team have one of their email addresses because we're negotiating with vendors on their
Yeah.
behalf because it makes things more simple. Well, my clients who are willing run simulated phishing emails, and they do it hopefully on a monthly basis. That's what I recommend. But a couple of them started letting me know, and it occurred to me, that isn't fair. That if anything, I'm a high value target
Yeah.
as the fractional CISO. So don't tell me. And I have had two times in the last 8 years where I absolutely 100% did click the link. And if any of you are familiar with the Pwn to Own contest,
Yep.
the whole point of that contest is all you get to have your victim do is click a link, and then you get 5 minutes to try to back hack their device. Well, I failed it twice. So I wouldn't say that that was a personal cyber attack
Hmm.
necessarily, but when you're in this space, it does show the importance of defense in depth.
Yeah.
Because if I can fall for it, anybody can. Um, Other than that, I've had a number of times where my credit cards have been compromised. Thankfully, that's only inconvenient. It isn't
Yeah.
the end of the world. I did have one person send me an email in 2018, the first time I ever got really spearphished. And it said, "My name is Professor so and so out of the University of London. We have this big conference coming up. Our keynoter just dropped out. Would you please fill in?" And it sounded a little too good to be true because it said, "We will pay for you and your spouse if she's interested to come over. Happy to
Yeah.
pay your full speaking fee. Please let us know." Well, first, in the academic world, that's not how life works. No one pays your full fee, and you're lucky to get half. But there were some little things that I think the AI world would have caught. First, it ended blessings to you on the
Yeah.
email. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but out of a university, that the context is wrong. But
Unusual. Yeah.
I should have seen Professor so and so, he, him, his. See,
Yeah.
that follows the context. So that was a red flag. And it came from a Gmail account. Now, the Gmail account looked legitimate. I have a Gmail account,
Yeah.
but I would have expected it to be a .edu.
Yeah.
So I asked my team to find the guy's real account, and the professor was real. Found the real account, emailed him. The whole thing was a scam. Someone
Interesting.
had targeted cybersecurity speakers with this scam. And I got close to falling for it. I keep trying to think, how was he going to monetize
Well,
it, Chris?
that was going to be my question. Was what was like? Clearly, there was spear phishing, but what were they going to try to get you to do?
My thought is normally when you do these kind of gigs, it's half down, half when you arrive. And
Hmm.
when you do international gigs, they tend to send you money via the Swift system. So I'm guessing he would have wanted a bank account
Yeah.
and then worked with a corrupt bank to suck money out as opposed to put it in. That's
Yeah.
one option. A second could have been blackmail. Could have been I fell for it and he got me and then said, "Well, here are the list of your clients because some of them are on your website, and here are the list of their executives because I found them on LinkedIn. And either you pay us 10 grand or in 24 hours, an email is going to go to all these people about just what a fraud you are."
Yeah.
Maybe so. There are a couple of angles they could have taken. But what I will say is that the fact that I was spearphished in 2018, I don't have delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
I'm not Bruce Schneier, who's testified in front of Congress, and the fact that someone took the time to do something that targeted means
Yeah.
if it can happen to me, it can happen to you.
I mean that's crazy. You would that they would target you on the speaking gig side. Like that.
Yeah,
That to me seems a relatively
benign.
unusual, and maybe that's the whole reason why something like that works. If they had gone after your accountant, you know that's
Yeah,
that's normal, that's expected, that's planned for. But a fake speaking gig is not high on the list of
no, no, that's fair. I think we have a lot of very bright people with either very jaded pasts or very challenging moral compasses to understand.
yeah.
And if only we could get them to use their abilities for the bright side of the force. But I think the number of folks looking for a creative scam almost as a pastime,
Yeah.
as a means of, yes, monetary gain, but also of entertainment. It becomes a hobby. And I think that's how you get those esoteric sorts of hits where someone is very specifically targeted in a very odd niche. So normally you don't see it coming.
Yeah, they're like, hey, I wonder if I could get this person
Mhm.
to click on a link.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So in terms of incident response, so what is incident response and how does it normally go down?
Incident response is when something bad has happened from a cyber criminal standpoint and damage of some sort has occurred. That is typically either a direct financial loss, wire fraud, transfer, fake invoice, that kind of thing, a loss of sensitive data. So you've had a data exfiltration of some sort, and my company's worked a number of those, or a ransomware attack, which could also have exfiltration of data. Most of them nowadays do. But the definition of a ransomware attack is someone gets into your company, and if you don't have any data, they can easily monetize, like credit card numbers
Yeah,
or healthcare data or what have you. Well, you have a lot of data that's important to you. Let's put it on a personal level. I lost my grandmother a few years ago, and I have some pictures of her a few weeks before she passed. And if someone took those from me, I would have a deep loss.
yeah,
Well, companies have that too, and some individuals do. They have data that it isn't sellable, but boy, they really either want it for emotional reasons or from a company. They need it to be able to do business,
Yeah.
like who ordered what parts from them that they need to deliver if you're some sort of manufacturing company. Well, a bad guy will get into your network and will encrypt the data. And what encryption means is you take the data and you essentially turn it into gibberish. And unless you have the magic decoder ring, you don't know how to get it back. And because of a lot of fancy math that people like Bruce Schneider know, and I just nod my head, you can't get it back without that decoder ring unless they have done something wrong in how they encrypted the data. So that's a ransomware attack. How do they start? Well, there are a couple of common attack vectors. The biggest wire fraud that my company worked was heavy into six figures, and it was against a client who had rented a big, big area at a hotel. And the head of marketing was running it, and that's common. And they did not run it through this company. This is a publicly traded company. They didn't run it through the accounts payable department. And the person that was running the marketing deal got an email from the hotel, legitimately from the hotel, saying, please pay us, and here's the account, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, the hotel's email had been hacked,
Ah,
unbeknownst to my client. So there was a bad guy listening in on the finance person at the hotel. So what happened is the bad guy realized that there was a bunch of money about to change hands. So any email the real person at the hotel sent didn't really go out. It went to the bad guy, who
yeah.
could then hit the forward on as usual button or the hold up just a second. We're going to do some fancy footwork because the bad guy had control of the email account.
Yeah.
So it was legitimately that account. It just wasn't the guy who should have been driving the car who was driving the car. And what he did is he changed the bank account information on the email as to where it was supposed to go. And my client never picked up the phone to validate it was accurate.
Yeah.
And they sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to the wrong account. And then a few weeks later, when the hotel called and said, "Where's our money?" And then my client said, "What are you talking about? We paid it 17 days ago." Well, the money was long, long, long gone.
Yeah.
So that's often how these things happen from a wire fraud standpoint. From a ransomware standpoint, the most common infiltration is someone falls for a phishing scam.
Yeah.
Someone who either has local admin rights to their computer, because too many people do, or someone that is in the IT team, or someone that has a computer that hasn't been properly patched. So there are vulnerabilities where any user could elevate themselves to
Yeah.
be an administrator. They get a bad link in an email, or they get a malicious attachment that gets through the filters, and they open that attachment, or they click that bad link, and then a bad guy has their hooks into a computer. And at that point, it becomes a race against time. How quickly can the bad guy elevate themselves to be either a local administrator or even better, a domain administrator, which means they can control all the computers at the company. And then it's pretty easy to start a ransomware attack versus how quickly can the IT team at that company detect that something bad has happened here. Our antivirus is yelling about folks trying to move laterally.
Yeah.
We may have systems called SIM solutions, Security Information Event Management, and they should have alarm bells start going off about this. But if you don't detect it in time, the bad guys will do a number of things in very specific order. First, they will try to elevate privileges. Then they will try to enumerate your network to understand how it works, where your servers are, your workstations, where your data, what your large applications are, all that good stuff. Then they will look at your backups. How do the backups work? Where do they go? They will then take out the backups, preferably very quietly. Like they'll just
Yeah.
stop the jobs and then they will delete the data stores that have that backed up data on them and then do a secure wipe over it. And as soon as they know you have no backups, then they run that encryption software that lights up all of your data and turns it into hamburger until you pay up.
How quick? Let me interrupt. How
Not at
quickly can
all.
they do that process?
I've heard of it in as little as like 20 hours. That is extremely unusual, Chris. Normally, this is a months long
Hmm.
thing in my experience.
So it's the sort of thing where they'll do lots of groundwork and then execute things kind of like in batches in the middle of the night when no one's looking.
That's that's a lot of it. I will say that the biggest Christmas gift, I don't know when this is going to run, but we are recording this shortly
Yeah.
after the holidays. And my biggest Christmas gift was none of my clients got hacked
Yeah.
over Christmas or New Year's because, yes, they will do a lot of recon and they will spring their trap at 2 a.m. Saturday morning
Yeah.
or at midnight Christmas Eve or when they know you're on a skeleton crew.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The biggest one that my company's worked had an initial ransom demand of over $8 million,
Ooh.
and they had us good. We ended up having to pay over $1 million, and that hurt because it was almost certainly Russian organized crime. And advising a client to indirectly put bullets in Putin's gun was one of the hardest professional things I ever had to do. But we had 800 jobs on the line, and I
Yeah.
didn't see another way out, and we did what we had to do. But the way that that one went down was very interesting. First, it wasn't a fish. What I said normally happens.
Mhm.
This one, they had a Microsoft email server, an Exchange server facing the internet. They had not yet gone to O365. Running your own Exchange server is a really bad idea. Okay. It's like trying to distill your own gasoline. You need to leave that to the big boys. Don't do it yourself. So there was a nasty patch that came out in July 2021 for Exchange servers. Well, as soon as a patch comes out, it's often easy to deconstruct that
Yeah.
patch and see what did it do.
Here's what we fixed, everybody. Here's what's broken.
So it's a beacon. So if we were in Humvees in Iraq and you've got a row of 10 of them and three of them have a big welded plate on some spot of the Humvee, well, if I'm a bad guy, I'm going to try to find a Humvee without that plate, and that's where I'm going to shoot.
Yeah.
Well, that's as soon as the patch comes out, you can reverse engineer it and see what it did. So in August of 2021, a bad guy found the unpatched server, compromised it, installed a persistence tool called Cobalt Strike, and then he patched it. The bad guy patched the server to close the barn doors behind him so no other cyber criminal will get in. Then what we think happened is whoever did that sold it to a different cyber criminal group that does the enumeration of the network, that
Gotcha.
looks to see how juicy a target this is. And then they may have sold it to yet one more that did the actual ransomware attack. But it was a 7 months process, start to finish.
Oh.
And if we had been looking hard at the antivirus tools and such about 3 weeks before it went down, it was blatantly obvious something was wrong. We didn't have a service that was monitoring antivirus
Mhm.
24/7 that would pick up the phone and say, Houston, we have a problem. And that's one of the things that my company advocates for. Having antivirus is great as long as someone's looking.
Yeah.
So hiring a third party to do that is one of the important pieces of defense in depth.
Uh, what are your thoughts? I know the U.S. government has talked about the possibility of making ransomware payments illegal because you kind of know that it's going to you're
Yeah.
giving money, whoever the
Mhm.
money's going to, you're giving money to criminals in one shape or form, whether it's a the proverbial kid in a hoodie in a basement in his mom's basement in Nebraska, or if it's Russian organized crime, which is probably
Probably is.
organized crime is probably much more likely these days.
Yep.
What are your thoughts if that $1 million payment actually became illegal? Because
Um,
because then you have $1 million or 800 jobs.
right. I think it's impractical. We have a lot of laws on the books now that try to incent good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple of issues here, Chris. First, laws do not change behavior. I want to say that categorically. A law itself does not change behavior. A law plus enforcement of the law
Yeah.
plus adequate penalties for breaking the law. Those three things in combination will change behavior, but it takes all three. So we can't have legislators write on a piece of paper, well, it's illegal for you to do this, and the problem's going to go away. That
Yeah.
will not work. There has to be significant money spent to enforce that law. And my opinion is that if we took that money trying to enforce the law of no ransomware and instead pivoted it towards we can't be selling internet connected devices that come with a default username of user and password of password.
Yes.
You see, we can't sell devices going to the internet that have out of date operating system with known vulnerabilities and no way to patch them.
Yeah.
And currently, those things are illegal. I'm sorry, are legal.
Yes.
We are living in the same world that we were 100 years ago when radiation was becoming a thing and we were understanding it, and people were selling elixir of radium
Yeah.
to sell everything from and fix everything from gout to goiter to constipation to restoration of the marital impulse, except it was poison and it was killing you.
Yeah.
It just looked good in the bottle. Well, our internet connected world, it has some bright spots. I don't want to say everything you buy is inherently insecure because that isn't true. But the number of things that are out there that are genuinely destructive, because when you hook them up to the internet, a couple of things are happening. First, you have broken down every geographic border on the planet.
Yeah.
The whole world is dancing on the head of a pin in cyberspace, and you don't have laws of the US to protect you. So the defense becomes more one of your problem as opposed to something the government can help with the way they do with automotive safety or aircraft safety or what have you. That's the first big issue that comes with that. Um, the second one is a little more nuanced. When we buy these devices, we do it with a thought that they are going to serve a certain purpose,
Yeah.
and that's the only purpose that they can do. And in the world of computers, that isn't the case. A computer does whatever someone can trick it into doing. They are completely morally agnostic. So we're buying these devices and we're thinking, well, this is designed just to turn my lights on and off when I use an app from my phone. And they don't realize that what it could do is be programmed to send a tremendous amount of traffic over the internet to one specific target and render it completely non-functioning.
Yeah.
That's what happened to the eastern seaboard of the US in 2016 with something called the Dyn DNS attack, where 100,000 security cameras, just standard video cameras with
Hmm.
username of admin and password of password, they ganged up on this part of the World Wide Web called DNS or domain name resolution, and they took out a company called Dyn that ran that. And unless you had secondary DNS servers for your website, like Google or Amazon or Yahoo or any of the big ones, you couldn't get to those sites.
Yeah.
Well, that was because people bought these insecure products that they thought were just a security camera. No, they're not. Every time we buy one of these, we're buying a candle, and that candle has the potential to burn your or someone else's house down. So, to get back to your original question, I think the thought of making ransomware payments illegal sounds great on paper, completely and totally impractical. And if we look at history, governments governments have two fundamental flaws with cybersecurity right now, in my opinion. First, they don't follow it as strongly as they should. The Office of Personnel Management breach in 2015
Yeah.
against the U.S. government's HR department was a stunning example of it. We lost 5 million people's fingerprints that were kept in an unencrypted database. It's hard to issue people new fingerprints. In my opinion, that was a loss of life event because there were people that were covert spies likely in that database. And if a foreign government got a hold of that list, there are probably people that aren't here anymore as a result of it. So people making laws that don't apply to them, I have a real problem
Yeah.
with. So I think that's one part of the issue. The second part is that when it comes down to the real world practicality of a given law, when you're in a desperate situation, you have to do things that are the least risky, and often a very risky thing is the least risky thing that you can do.
Yeah.
The example I love to use on stage is if one of my kids had a bad accident and I know the hospital is 10 minutes away, I know how to get there, I have a working vehicle, and I think the kid is in a spot where they could like apply direct pressure to whatever had happened, would I break every possible traffic law and still try to be safe?
Yeah.
But if the light's red, well, if no one's coming, I'm going and I'm going to save my child. And if someone was to question me, or even if I had a ticket, so be it. I was in a situation. I made the best move I could at the time, and I defend my position.
Yeah.
Well, when you've got 800 people who are working for a company, or you give $1 million to cyber criminals, you can't legislate your way out of that.
Yeah.
See, until we have a world government, which I do not see happening in my lifetime, the only way that you can legislate your way out of that is to ensure that the world is playing by roughly the same rules.
Yeah.
And we have an abysmal track record doing that.
Yeah. That's not going to happen.
No.
So if that's the outcome, so I guess the question asked one follow up. Once you paid the ransom, how quickly did they actually? And this is kind of the weird thing is like, how ethical were the hackers to actually give you the
Yes.
key? I mean, they have a reputation between, we're the mean hackers, but they also realize that
Hmm.
if we never give anyone the key, we're never going to get the money.
It is an interesting issue. About two-thirds of the time, you do get a decryption key. And I have yet to run into a spot where you gave a decryption key and then, I'm sorry, you gave them the money. They gave you a decryption key, but then they said, well, we have a copy of your data and we want more money. Now, that has happened. It
Yeah,
happened very famously in the Change Healthcare breach just last year. But I have yet to run into that. And you already alluded to it, Chris. Believe it or not, the criminals have a reputation to uphold. So most of the time, you do get a decryption key. Most of the time, it works. But there are edge cases. I worked an event, it's been a number of years now, but what happens when you encrypt data, when you make it turn into gibberish, like I said, you're making it more random.
yeah,
And if you have a program on your hard drive that's designed to compress data or deduplicate data, well, you've broken the ability for those programs to work,
gotcha.
which is a mathematical way of saying your data is going to bloat. It's going to get a lot bigger. So one of the recommendations I give to my clients is to make sure they have at least 35% free drive space on every important drive share, because if they suffer a ransomware attack and the data gets bigger, even though mathematically it shouldn't, in practicality it does. Um, if they end up filling a drive, and if the encryption keeps on going, because that's exactly what it's going
Yeah,
to do, anything after the drive is full is now unrecoverable forever because it
yeah,
never finished writing. And I have yet to work a ransomware case where we got back 100% of the data. Normally it's 60 to 80% you get back, and the rest of it is lost to either full drives or just odd errors. You know, cyber criminals aren't known for their strong beta testing to make sure that in this version of Windows and this version of Linux and this type of hard drive and so on and so forth, that
wait.
their
Criminals
system
have bad QA.
criminals don't have. You are the QA department and the victim all in one. Aren't you a nice guy? So you don't get it all back. Um, if you're lucky, you get around 80%. But the cases that we've worked, I have yet to have one where we have been stiffed, where they just took the money and
Mhm.
ran. And ironically, we've worked ransomware cases as small as $490. That one was amazing. It came out of China, and we picked it up. It was about a $2 million company, and they said, "What do we do?" And I said, "You pay it."
Yeah,
And they said, "But aren't we propagating the issue and this and that?" And I said, "Now I'm by the hour and emergency services rate, so I'll talk about it as long as you want. But they don't know they should be asking you for 49,000, not
yeah,
490." Because you're a $2 million company, you pay it, you hope to God it works, and then we're going to talk about how to keep it from happening again. But this is a new outfit. They don't understand how the game is played, and you got lucky.
yeah.
So that was our smallest, and the biggest was the one where the initial demand was 8 million.
So, if we have time, we'll do two things. What are the preventative things that people can do? You and I talked a little bit beforehand. We know that when it comes to cybersecurity, there is no such thing as 100%,
No.
unless you live in a cage and you don't have in a cave and you're living with rocks and matches,
Yes.
which none of us want to do. Well, okay, 99% of us don't want to do this. There's a small percentage who want to go back to that. How do we manage in a way that's practical if perfect security is
Sure.
immensely expensive? How do we get good enough security? How do we get 90% of the way there, 99% of the way there?
We need some proactive, we need some detective, and we need some break glass solutions. The proactive, I'm a giant fan of cybersecurity awareness training. Many companies don't have it because we get emails from all over the world, and some of them look very good and very convincing. As I said, I've fallen for a couple of them myself that my clients had put out. We need strong cybersecurity awareness training, and that is a huge step forward. We need diligent patching. regrettably, these applications you put on our computers have new vulnerabilities found all the time.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a good, diligent patching program, especially of our externally facing systems, and after that, of any system that may realistically get an attachment from an email, so a PDF or a
Yeah.
Word doc or what have you, patching of those is imperative, along with your Windows and Linux operating systems. So those are the important, I'll say, proactive steps. Uh, More ongoing. Passwords stink. We're working on, pass phrases and
Yeah.
pass keys, and I think pass keys may get somewhere long term, but we're stuck with passwords. People are using the same passwords everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. I'm not a fan of required password changes unless there's indicator of compromise. But I am a fan of having your company do a dark web scan looking for any time one of your email accounts showed up in a former breach, seeing what the password was, if the passwords were harvested, and
Hmm.
then make sure that password doesn't exist anywhere on your network. And then to go back to the awareness training, we need to have people using different passwords for different things.
Yeah.
There are too many systems for a human to do that. I've got over 700 passwords in my password store. You need a password keeper,
Yeah.
which is scary to some people because what if the password keeper gets hacked? Reasonable concern. You got to serve somebody. It's like that country song.
Yeah.
You got to serve somebody. And I like companies that specialize in password keepers because if they have a bad breach, they're probably out of business,
Yeah.
which means they care as much as you do about keeping your passwords secure. So we got to have a password keeper. That is very big. Um, from a break glass standpoint, having offline backups, immutable offline backups. A lot of companies will sell you immutable backups. If they will sell you immutable backups and a guarantee that if their backups don't work, they are liable for any damages you incur, then maybe they're immutable. But no one's going to sell you that.
Yeah.
So you need offline backups in a drawer. They're a pain in the rear end. It is challenging to do them for cloud-based services, but it can be done. But I have a number of clients that once a month are hooking up a device to their network, backing up everything they care about, removing it from the network, and then taking it somewhere else. And my good clients
Yep.
have three of them. They have one plugged into the network, they have one unplugged from the network, but in the same room for cyber defense.
Yep.
And then they have one that they've taken off site for physical defense. So in case the whole place burns.
Yep.
Um, I think those are some of the big areas. We could spend another hours on the things that you should be doing to stop ransomware or cyber attacks in general. The only other thing I'd be remiss to bring up, even though it's not ransomware, is when it comes to moving money around. You want to be the most irritable, pain in the rear end, have to follow every process and procedure. No one wants to work with you. You take the grumpiest but competent person that you've got and put them in charge of moving your money.
Yep.
And that person really needs unique passwords because if their email gets hacked, that's a really bad day. And I've worked breaches where that happened.
Yep. I am a firm believer of all of those. I have tried and am not as good about it. Is particularly this is this is mid January. California has had some really nasty fires,
They do.
and the concept of geographically diverse backups springs into my mind because if it's absolutely horrible if your house burns down because you lost the original,
Yes.
you lost the backup in your desk. But if you kept the backup at the community bank three corners down and it burned down as well, you don't have a backup there anymore. So I do have a geographically diverse backup that I send off to someone on the other side of the country. I don't do it frequently enough for it to be super effective,
Well, it's
but
a
it's at
good
least
last
something.
resort. Yeah, it beats nothing. Just make sure it's encrypted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying. Is it? I have to double check on
It's
that.
important. So I was at a big company that I won't name because I have named them earlier that lost a drive in transit using a big shipper like
Mm-hmm.
UPS or FedEx or DHL. I won't name which one, but the server just disappeared into the ether, never to be seen again.
Oh,
Well, it had like a million user accounts on it, and it wasn't encrypted at rest. And the company ended up having to do divulging this had happened and pay for 2 years of
yeah.
identity theft and so on. Um, And the CEO of the company went to his directs and they said, I'm looking for a piece of paper that explains why this happened, that explains how it's never going to happen again, and that has a signed letter of resignation from you, because if it does ever happen in your area, I'm going to invoke it.
Wow.
And frankly, given how easy it is to fix that problem, to simply encrypt the data at
Yeah.
rest before you move it, I thought he was reasonable.
Yeah.
I thought that was a fair thing to say, that we're a big enough company to where we just need to care enough.
Yeah.
And it's back to those laws don't change behavior. Well, he made a rule, but the enforcement of the rule was going to happen on its own because it only
Yeah.
invoked when something bad happened. But the penalty was you lost your career.
Yeah.
Well, that would make me care.
Yeah. It forces you to. And I also agree with the having the grumpy person in charge of dealing with
Hmm.
public facing, dealing with the finances. I Because I've been doing this long enough, I have someone who does a contractor who's out of the country who does very specific small amount of work for me, and it's in the scope of my business an infinitesimally small amount of money.
Okay.
But I got an email saying, "Hey, we need to change the bank account." And
Uh,
all of my red flags go up, and it's like,
Good.
okay, I need to go through this. I can't respond to the email because I have to assume the email's compromised. I've got to call this person. Well, they're halfway around the world, so instead of doing it at I've got to make this phone call at 2 in the morning my time.
Yeah.
All over a very small, if the money, if I had given the scammer $50, irrelevant. But I got to practice what I preach. I've got to go jump through all these hoops. And they were like, "Oh, I totally understand it." They were totally, but it was funny just to do it over such a small amount of money.
Well, you absolutely do have to jump through the hoops, Chris. And sometimes those small amounts of money lead to much bigger ones.
Yeah.
So understanding root cause as to what happened. Was their email hacked? Was your email hacked? Are they using an insecure computer? So it wasn't the email itself. Someone had a keyboard logger. Who knows how that went down? But figuring out what the root cause was to see if you can keep doing
Yeah.
business with them again is a very important piece of the puzzle.
And like, I'm, a little jokingly saying an infinitesimal small amount of money to my business, but not a small amount of money to them. If their computer was hacked and they didn't get their paycheck, that's significant to them and their worldview. In the same way, what happened
Yeah,
to Target was relevant
to me, you're absolutely right.
very relevant to you, to the whole corporation. Yeah, a pretty big bump in the road, but not one that's going to shut down Target. But it ended your career and lots of other people's.
Well said. Well said. Yes, it did.
So if we're kind of bumping up against a time limit here, so I want to be sensitive to that. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Thank you for offering. I am available at simply Bryce, BRYCE, at bryceaustin.com. You can find out more about the company at TCE, that's Target, sorry, Tango Charlie Echo Strategy.com or bryceaustin.com. And my direct number for those of us nice enough to listen to the podcast is 612-730-9897.
And do you have resources if people want to learn more about ransomware and what they can do for their companies? Do you have resources on that?
Absolutely. We put out a monthly newsletter with best practices on cybersecurity and what's going on in the news. We've got a number of articles that I'll say are cybersecurity 101 type articles on the website, tcestrategy.com. It's a great place to begin understanding the blocking and tackling of cybersecurity. And then, if need be, we can help you relate it to your company or your situation.
Awesome. Bryce, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.